I don't forget to do that. And let's see. I want to screen share. And then I've got to shrink this down like I always do and do slideshow. There we go. Okay. Well, that's not right.
Uh-oh, you're getting Christie's.
You know what? I lost a slide somehow. That's okay.
Oh, no.
So we're talking about parasites tonight. And parasites are organisms that live in or on a living host of another species. They survive by taking nutrients from this host. They typically provide no benefit in return. And I've got that starred because there are a couple of cases where there is some symbiosis happening, but usually that's not the case. And that's the actual technical definition of a parasite. And there are parasites of humans, of plants, animals, insects, fishes. And there are parasites that are microbiological, that are plants, fungi, insects, and also aquatic animals and creatures. So to start with us, there are 3 types of parasites that can cause disease in humans. And within these are numerous species, but they fall into 3 different categories. The first is protozoa, which are single-celled parasite organisms, and they can only multiply or divide within the host, meaning us. Then we have something called helminths, and these are worm parasites. They are typically visible to the naked eye at their adult stage, but unlike protozoa, they cannot multiply in humans. So some common examples of this might be roundworms, hookworms, that sort of thing. And then what we are most familiar with is what is called ectoparasites. These visit or live on rather than in their hosts. And that includes things like lice, fleas, mosquitoes, biting flies, house flies, things of that nature. So to go through these one at a time, with protozoa, there are many types of parasites that affect humans. Most notably is malaria. Also, as we will see, things like chiggers and scabies. But what we're talking about here, and these are a little less known, the first one is Chagas disease, which it affects the blood, the muscles, nerves, heart. Let me shrink this. Esophagus and colon, and it is transmitted through an insect bite. We have toxoplasmosis, which is a parasitic pneumonia that results in an infection with the Toxoplasma gondii organism. And it affects the liver, heart, eyes, and brain. And this occurs worldwide. Then we have acanthomobiasis, this is hard to say, which is a tiny amoeba that can affect the eyes, skin, and brain. and it exists all over the world in water and soil. And this is important. Individuals can become infected if they clean contact lenses with tap water. Please don't clean your contacts with tap water, or you may very well get this. And then trichomoniasis, which is also just known as trich, is a sexually transmitted infection, and it is the result of a parasite called Trichomonas vaginalis, and it affects the female urogenital tract. It can exist in males, but usually without symptoms.
Ooh.
And now with the helminths, which there are 6 main types, and this is the first 3. And the helminths affect both humans and animals. The first, which I think people are pretty much familiar with, is roundworm, otherwise known as Escherichiasis. A roundworm infection does not usually cause symptoms, but the worm may be visible in feces, and it enters the body through food or drink. Next is hookworm, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, which can cause intestinal diseases because the worm lays its eggs in the soil, and that's how we can get it through fruits and vegetables that are not, especially vegetables that are not properly washed. The larvae also can penetrate the skin of humans just through touch. And early symptoms of this include itching and rash.
So is it dangerous for me to eat out of the garden without washing it?
I would definitely wash what you've
Okay.
gotten.
Well, I just go out and pick a piece of kale and chew on it every once in a while. I guess I won't do
Yeah,
that anymore.
I'd wash them with water. Yeah.
Okay.
And then beef and pork tapeworms, I'm sure everybody knows about this. They occur due to the presence of Tania tapeworms in the intestine. People may ingest these tapeworms by eating undercooked beef or pork.
Mhm.
Taniasis also causes cysticercosis, which is one of the most common parasitic infections in the US. And that's where you have seen these photos when, or not photos, but x-rays of people that have a tapeworm that's like 3 or 4 feet in their intestine.
Hmm. How come Germans don't get it? They eat raw pork and raw beef all the time.
I don't know. I had no idea of that. I don't know.
I didn't know about the raw pork, but certainly raw beef, and in
Yeah.
France too.
It's a raw pork, and they put it on their breakfast roll
Oh my
with
goodness.
onions on it.
I
I don't
don't
like
know.
it.
Oh, I did not know that. Oh
And
my
it
Yeah,
goodness.
kind of
found
makes
it
you wonder about sushi also, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that is a problem.
Hello?
Sorry, that is a problem with worms in sushi
Yeah,
and different parasites in the.
I'm sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Um,
so the next one is toxocarasis, and this transmits the infection from animals to humans,
Hmm.
and often usually livestock. It affects the eyes, brain, and liver in humans. And interestingly enough, I read that nearly 5% of people in the US have antibodies against it. And that suggests that millions of people have actually been in contact with the infection.
Hmm.
And then whipworm, this is somewhat well known also known as trichiuraceous, whipworms live in the larvae, live in the large intestine, and they lay eggs there. Now the body passes the eggs out in feces, but humans can become infected when ingesting the eggs, for example, on unwashed fruit or vegetables. Again, and it is common across the world.
Hmm.
And then the last of the helminths, elephantiasis, lymphatic filariasis. This spreads through mosquito bites and affects the lymph system. Infection can lead to lymphedema, and elephantiasis, which a lot of people mispronounce as elephantitis, which can cause swelling and enlargement of the arms and legs. So all pretty nasty stuff that we are subject to.
Ooh.
And then the last thing that we are subjected to, and these are probably the most well-known, is what is called the ectoparasites. And these again can affect us, and they live on the outside of the body. They don't get to the inside of the body. And the first one is bed bugs, which everybody knows about. They live on clothes and bedding. The bites are itchy and can cause skin discoloration.
Ooh.
And then lice, which live off human blood. And there are 3 types: body lice, head lice, and pubic lice. And then, as I mentioned, scabies. And these are tiny mites called sarcoptes. You might not even be able to see these. They burrow into the skin, and they are highly contagious through bodily contact. That's why if a child is found to have this at school, they are sent home and quarantined for a certain amount of time.
Mm.
And then, not so well known in this group is Demodex. And these are tiny mites that live in and around hair follicles. And they can cause a range of ocular diseases if they burrow around eyelids and eyebrows, which is typically where they like to be.
Mm.
And then finally, screwworms. And screwworms are fly larvae that burrow into the skin, and they can cause severe infection and disease. And our common name for this is maggots, and yes, it can happen. It can easily happen with livestock or other domestic animals, like pets that are left outside. If the flies lay their eggs under the skin of the animal.
Now, is this the same type of maggots that you find in the garbage?
Yes, they are.
Oh.
If they're, if the eggs are deposited under the skin, the eggs turn into the maggots and they burst out of the skin, basically. But they're still feeding on it.
Ooh.
The ones from the garbage, those are usually just like the housefly eggs and different fly
Right,
eggs and
right.
stuff too. And
Mm.
it's just,
Yeah, ick.
Ugh.
So now we move on to parasites of plants. Most parasites of plants are or evolve from a pathogenic fungus. They enter the plant actually through a tiny opening, such as a leaf stoma. And if you don't know what that is pretty much a little tiny opening in a leaf, and they're covered with them, which is how they take water in through the leaves. It can also go in through an opening in the bark or the end of a broken stem or hair on a plant. These parasites absorb nutrients from the cell walls of the host plants. And they also grow an extension on the plant surface called a germ tube, which can be opened or closed. And these parasites typically, while they feed on the plant, they do not cause disease in the plant. And, you know, a good example of this, if you've been out in one of the parks and you see on leaves, and you see it a lot on maple leaves this time of year, these little nodules that are all over the leaves.
Yeah.
Like they're kind of a yellowish colored nodule that looks like tiny upside down test tubes. That's what that is. That's the germ tubes. So yeah, see, that's where my first slide went. Okay, we have, talking about this, parasitic plants, and they take some or all of their nutrients from other plants, and they are in two categories. You have partial parasitic plants that take just some of their nutrients from other plants, and you have total parasitic plants that take all of their nutrients from other plants.
Now, does this have anything to do also with that tomato fungus or whatever it is, spot or whatever it's called?
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, okay. It's where the leaves get spots on them and they get turned brown.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
that's a blight. Yeah.
that is actually something different. That's not a parasitic plant. That's a
Oh, okay.
considered a parasitic fungi, which we will talk about.
Okay.
So there are three types of parasitic plants within those two that I mentioned, the total and partial. You have direct root parasites, which mostly occur in tropical and subtropic areas. Some of them have no chlorophyll of their own and are completely dependent on the host plant for nutrients and water. And there are other species of these that have their own chlorophyll. They're green and they can produce some or all of their own food. Then you have mycotroph, of which there are 450 species and make up 1/8 of all parasitic plants. They connect to and feed from fungi, which therefore makes them a parasite of a parasite. If you can wrap your head around that, and those are termed an epiparasite. And these attach to fungus, which provides food and water. And in a little bit of a symbiotic relationship, these plants provide some fungus. They provide some of their food back to the plant in return. And then a very interesting one, dwarf mistletoes. And this is not what you get at Christmas time. Dwarf mistletoes. They have a great impact on forest and forest ecology and productivity. They affect only conifers. And in America, they only affect the family Pinaceae, which is cedars, firs, hemlocks, larches, pines, and spruces. And they grow a fairly large fruit. And what happens is the fruit explodes to expel hundreds of seeds for what are comparably long distances. The seeds travel downward and out, and they land on upward pointing pine needles to create the plant. And their body parts, as they grow on the needles, anchor themselves inside the tree stems.
Hmm.
They have their own chlorophyll, but are dependent on the host plant tree for water and carbohydrates. And they have a 6 to 8 year life cycle, which makes them difficult to control, plus the fact that they live in the tree canopies.
Hmm.
And we're going to look at that here.
Mhm.
Now, these are all example of parasitic plants that are total parasites. And upper left there, that's dwarf mistletoe, which again is only in North America. And that's a big bunch of it that has attached and spread and actually killed a branch on a cedar.
Hmm.
In the center here, you have cuscuta, which is most commonly known as dodder, and in some places known as amarbel, and it is a member of the morning glory family. And it grows everywhere around the world except Antarctica. And I've put there what the long stringy plant part looks like, and then what the flower looks like on an inset there on the lower right.
Sort of pretty.
Yeah. And then on the right there, something called, commonly known as a broom rape or a orobanch. And this is a North American only parasitic plant. And it's from the same genus as sedums. And again, a total parasite. And then we don't have this here, but I think it's the most interesting one on the bottom left. This is called Rafflesia, and it is only found in Malaysia and Indonesia. And it is a root parasite, and it's a total parasite. So it grows and attaches itself to the roots of trees.
So is mushrooms, what are they considered then?
They are not considered parasites
Okay,
because
'cause they
they are not. Mushrooms don't live off of living plants.
Oh,
They
okay.
live off of dead and decomposing plant matter.
Oh, okay.
Now, to get to what you had mentioned, there is parasitic plant fungi, and these are the four most common. On the upper right there, you have botrytis, which is that gray mold that you see most typically on peonies. And I had read, when you see this, which I've just in the last week started seeing these on my peonies, they say on any stem where you've got that on the leaves, you need to like immediately cut those stems off at like all the way down to just a few inches from the ground.
And that does work because I had it every year on mine. It's out by my mailbox, a big one. And I didn't know, I thought that was just it dying back. Then I read about that mold, what it was. And so as soon as it appears, I cut it back to the ground, and it comes back beautifully every year. This year,
Okay.
last year, I got it right away. This year was the first time that it did not come back on it.
Yep.
Also, that mosaic virus, my
Yes.
nasturtiums have that right now. And I thought that was something to do with the leaf coloring.
No, now
And now I know it's a
for-
virus.
for the rest of these that we're going to look at here on this page, the mosaic virus, which is the yellowing leaves, and you see it a lot on larger vegetables also.
Cucumbers.
Cucumbers, squash, zucchini, pumpkin, that, and then the powdery mildew, which is the white spots, and then the leaf spots, which typically are on tomatoes, which are called blight. You're supposed to treat those with a powder as soon as, when they're young, to prevent those.
Okay.
The powdery mildew I got on my lilac bushes too.
Oh,
Yeah.
Having to get rid of them. Yeah.
I sometimes get the powdery mildew on my hydrangeas.
Yep.
Not every year, but sometimes I do. So to continue here, Christy gave me this picture to add. We talked about this in a previous presentation. This is the parasitoid fungus, which creates those.
Parasitoid.
Huh?
Parasitoid, like parasite.
Oh,
I
okay.
left out just a syllable there, and that was a hurry thing. I'm sorry.
And
about that.
this is the fungus that creates those zombie ants that we talked about in a previous presentation. They find their way inside the ant from a tiny space, in its shell or between sections of its shell. And it eats away at the insides of it. And eventually it gets to the point where the ant leaves the colony, goes to a plant, and does what's called a death bite on the leaf and dies. And sometimes the colonies have gotten smart enough that they can recognize an infected member of their colony, and they will carry it out and far away from the colony to prevent more of their numbers being infected.
This picture is from a friend of mine, Karen Scott, and it's actually a spider under there. Absolutely incredible photograph.
It is. Okay, so now we move on to insects. Most parasites that we have and deal with are from the insect world. Most of them prey on other insects. Some are parasites of plants. And as we know, some prey on humans, and we are the most familiar with those. So one thing I would like to touch on before we go any further with that, there are some cases of insect fungi parasitic symbiosis, which is really a complex situation, a complex symbiosis. And what happens is certain fungi form highly specialized parasitic relationships with insects. And for example, what we are looking at here, a example of the fungal genus Septobasidium, which is an entomopathogen, of which there are 175 species, is parasitic on scale insects that live on the trees. And we're going to talk about scale insects. The fungus forms an elaborate structure over top of colonies of the scales insects that are feeding on the bark of a tree. And these insects, they sink their proboscis into the bark and remain there the rest of their life, sucking sap. That's what they do. The fungus, covered over them, of course, sinks specialized branches into the bodies of some of those shield insects and feeds on them without killing them. And the caveat with this is those insects that are parasitized by the fungus become sterile. Now, when newly hatched scale insects are born and they come out and crawl over the surface of the fungus, they tend to do that when the fungus is sporulating. In other words, it's created spores and is ready to release them. And it releases them while these newly hatched scale insects are crawling over it. And those fungal spores attach to those young insects and germinates. So then part of that insect colony is sacrificed to the fungus as food, which is in return for the fungal protection provided for the rest of the insects. So the insect is parasitic on the tree, and the fungus is parasitic on the insect, but the tree itself is the ultimate victim of all of this.
Mm.
So it's a very, it's not a simple thing that happens. It's very, it's a complicated relationship, but it's also very interesting.
Mhm.
Any questions on that?
Mm-mm. No.
Okay. So now you wonder, what's a scale insect? Well, a scale insect is a small bug with a protective shield-like scale on its back, similar to a beetle. It spends, but they don't have wings. It spends most of its life attached by its mouth to a single plant. And sometimes they occur in such large numbers that it becomes a serious pest on a plant, usually a tree. And here are the four most common examples. First of all, mealybugs, which I'm sure everybody's probably heard of, maybe even seen. Second is the cottony cushion scale. And then third, the whitefly larvae. And then fourth, the brown scale insect. So those are the four most populous ones. So now we move on to something else. This Thailand cheetah, this is very interesting to me. It is a nematode, which means an eelworm, and it is a diverse animal phylum that inhabits a broad range of environments, very broad. They are a roundworm, and unlike flatworms, they have tubular digestive systems with an opening at both ends. So they have a mouth at one end and they have a rectum at the opposite end. There are at least 40,000 species of these, and it is highly argued. Some scientists say that it could be up to 1 million species. And this is what is really important. They have adapted to every ecosystem, all of them, including the ocean floors. They have absolutely invaded everything. They affect soils, plants, agriculture, horticulture, and most all vertebrates, including humans. And this does not want to. Here we go. So now, parasitic insects in general, these are some of the most common ones. We have wireworms, which are related to mealworms. We talked about the whitefly larvae just a couple slides ago. This is what whiteflies look like. cucumber beetle, which I think most people have seen at one time or another, and the tomato hornworm, which is really a misnomer. What that really is a larvae of the spotted hawk moth. And those are all parasites of plants. And here are some more, which are all parasites of plants. You have the red spider mites, aphids, of course, which everybody knows about. Squash bugs, I think most gardeners know about. And then cabbage worms, as they are called, which they are really larvae of the cabbage white moth, which people are familiar with. And to look at some other things related to insect parasites, there are parasites of insects, as I mentioned early on in the presentation. This is one on the far left here. This is a parasitic aphid wasp. And it's actually beneficial to us because what it does is it inserts its eggs into aphid bodies. The eggs hatch and turn into larvae, which feeds on the aphid's insides, killing it. And they will lay hundreds of eggs one at a time into aphid bodies. So they kill a lot of aphids, which is good for us. Now, there are some parasites, and I did not put names here because they all only have scientific names, and there's literally dozens and dozens of them. Parasites of whiteflies. And again, here we have the larvae, and they turn the larvae black because they are the eggs are developing into larvae inside these larvae, and it makes the ID confusing. Only the shape of the parasite exit hole in a dead whitefly larvae will tell whether what emerged from that larvae was a whitefly or was the larvae of another insect. And it comes down to two things. If the hole on the back is circular, that indicates that there was a parasite inside that larvae that emerged. However, if it is a T-shaped hole, that indicates that an adult whitefly emerged from that shell. Now, another one, and there are a lot of these actually that do this, the tachinid fly. It lays its eggs actually on top of caterpillars. As you see here in the middle photo, when the eggs hatch, the larvae bore into the caterpillar body and feed on it. The other thing that happens with them is some adult tachinid flies attach themselves to the leaf of a plant that is something that animals eat, like something a rabbit would eat, for example, and they just sit there and wait for that leaf to be eaten. And in that way, they enter the insides of what now becomes a host animal. So they end up in the digestive tract of a host animal, what becomes a host animal. So that's kind of different. They've got two different ways of operating. And that on the left is a tachinid fly. And right above it there is one of its larvae. But then in the center, that's a caterpillar from a different butterfly or moth. I don't know which one it is. And you can see those fly eggs on top of it. And To continue with parasites of insects, eggs sometimes fall victim, not just larvae. Here we have black corn earworm eggs. And a couple of these are dark because a trichogramma wasp has planted eggs inside of those eggs, and a larvae is developing inside those eggs. And the larvae is going to eat the insides out of that egg and then emerge. The white eggs that you see there are not parasitized. It's just the black ones. So eggs get planted into eggs, eggs turn into larvae, eat the insides out of the eggs, and then emerge into adults. And then we have parasites of animals and aquatic features. And I was just amazed going through this. And I wish I could have done like a list of more common ones, but what I found is there are just thousands of parasitic species that affect mammals, herps, which of course is reptiles and amphibians, birds, bats, fish, and other aquatic creatures. And I'm just going to give an example of a few here. And from the picture on this page, although we don't have them here, this is the Erexina esau, which I think is interesting. It is an earwig of bats.
Okay.
And it occurs in Indonesia and Malaysia only. The adult rides on the host's bodies, and it actually lays its eggs in the host uterus.
Oh.
And to top it off, these earwigs themselves are parasitized by bat fleas. So again, you've got a parasite that acts in a totally different manner from others, and it's parasitized by parasites. So next, and this is very common actually, this is the fluke worm, which is a trematode. It is a North American parasite that is found primarily in the intestines of raccoons. And in addition, in American minks, pond and brown frogs, and freshwater snails. They are mostly found in the raccoon intestines and in the freshwater snails. Those are the two where they're found the most. This parasite has a large distribution from Oregon to North Carolina. And the adult flukes vary in the host range, which is dependent on geographical location. So in other words, wherever you're going to find raccoons or freshwater snails, that's where you're going to find these. You're not going to find these in any animals where you don't have freshwater snails, or you don't have American minks, for example. You're not going to find them where you don't have pond frogs or brown frogs. And again, they're found in the intestines of the hosts, and they lay their eggs in there, and the larvae grows in there. They are then passed out of the intestines, and they can often, the adults, be seen in the feces if it's fresh. Really nasty looking. And this is Plasmodium odicoli, and it is a type of hookworm. And it causes, believe it or not, malaria in white-tailed deer. And that's the only animal it affects. You'll only find this in white-tailed deer.
Does it kill them?
It gives them malaria, which can kill them.
Oh,
And when they have done research on these, they have found, like what you see here, it causes this discoloration of the red blood cells. What you see here, the blue, that's the Plasmodium oticoli. And where you see the pinkish areas and the light pink areas, that's where it has discolored red blood cells.
oh, okay.
And then I'm not going into a lot of detail on this since Christy covered it in her presentation on invasive species. The sea lamprey, of course, is a type of eel that attaches its sucker mouth to the sides of fish. It gnaws at the fish's external tissue, the first few layers of flesh, and sucks its blood for nourishment. And its mouth produces a chemical that prevents the host's blood from clotting. So the host eventually dies from blood loss. When that happens, the lamprey, detaches itself and swims to wherever the next fish is it's going to do this to. And it is found, unfortunately, now in both fresh and salt waters. And to make matters worse, they do make nests like a lot of fish do, and they lay huge quantities of eggs in their nests, hundreds.
Mm.
And then leeches, they are not only parasitic, but also predatory worms, and they are considered worms that live off the host's blood. They also create peptides in their mouth to keep the host's blood from clotting. And interestingly enough, they are hermaphrodites. So if they cannot find a mate to mate with, they are able to reproduce asexually. Their bodies are actually firm and muscular. And because they are related to earthworms, they can make their body expand and contract to move. So if the water dries up in a section of a wetland, for example, where they have been living, they can move like an earthworm along the mud to somewhere else where there's water. And they're found in fresh waters and wetlands, and their potential victims are any creature in the water with soft, uncovered flesh, including humans. And so, in conclusion, there are thousands of parasites in our world, from microscopic to snake-sized, and no creatures are immune to them, including humans. Even some parasites have parasites, as we have seen. If you are like me, you will now want to take a long hot shower 4 times a day and not eat or touch anything. And that is the end of what I have to share. And
Absolutely incredible.
That is incredible. Ugh.
And I have to admit, he sent it to me and I did not sit down to read it till quite late at night. And I had a little trouble sleeping and I had some wacko dreams that night.
And you don't want to watch YouTube, what is it, the monsters inside of me?
Oh dear. I
It is a
probably
pretty
will have to watch that now.
didn't know there was such a thing. Didn't know there
That
was
sounds
such
like a
thing.
really good time.
Yeah, they actually show people pulling worms out of their eyes and all kinds of things.
Oh boy.
You know, I'm Googling that right now.
I think it's
And,
called
and
The
So,
Monsters
yep,
Inside of Me or something like that.
yep, Monsters Inside Me. Okay, well, I'll be watching
yeah,
that sometime.
and I've got a show, Carolyn. I was at Marshall's
Yeah,
and I found this. Oh, now it's not gonna let me do it. I found this T-shirt. You see this?
not really.
Step back, yeah, it just showed your
I,
background
I
only.
have to. You see this
Oh,
T-shirt?
the one you have on.
It's got mushrooms all over it,
Oh, how cool.
and it's what's really cool about it is the names of all the mushrooms that it has under them or above them is in
Mhm.
French.
In French.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Isn't
So it
it-
would be a Latin, some Latin in it, right? Probably.
yeah.
Mhm.
Isn't that neat?
That is really cool. Except I can't speak French.
Oh, me neither. I tried taking French in college and I absolutely could not.
It's easy. But I started taking it quite young. One of my grandmothers started teaching it to me at when I was starting to read and stuff. So it was quite fun. Then I took it in school all the way through. It was a lot of fun.
Well,
And Spanish.
with me trying to learn Spanish now, it seems like Spanish is a lot more logical than our language, except when it comes to tenses of words.
Oh.
A lot of
They actually
words,
have that in English. You just don't realize it.
Mhm.
a lot of words in English, we only have two tenses of, and they have three.
Yep.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's what gets confusing for me.
Oh, wow.
And see, I'm not sure.
Well, they have past, present, future, perfect, imperfect,
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah, we have a lot of, but we do have that in English. Like, I wish I were home.
right.
Not was home, and you know that that's right. But we have pluperfect in English. But I didn't learn a lot until I had Latin, and that taught me more about English.
Yeah.
Ah.
I don't know if I talked about this last week or not. Did I talk about the next person that's probably going to join us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's wonderful.
I won't bring that up again. Well, it is 9:01. Christy, do you have anything to add?
No, I'll have to pull these together. I have some incredible pictures from a trip to Caesar's Creek, and then today from Bigelow Prairie. And if you want a really great place to go, I highly recommend you go on 161
Mhm.
west of Plain City, not very far outside of Plain Cities, shortly after you cross over 42. And you can Google it or MapQuest or Google Maps, Bigelow Cemetery or Bigelow State Nature Preserve. And it's a left turn just right off of 161. There's a big power line on the right. And I had done a show on that before, one of the few remaining prairies and we have in Ohio. And this is 1/2 acre. And it is in full bloom, and people who visit often say they've never seen anything like the blooms this year. And
Mhm.
it is just incredible. And hopefully next week I'll have more pictures ready, because I only got back at about 7 o'clock tonight. So I've done a few pictures, but it's outstanding. I don't know if I can share my screen. Okay, no, I can't.
You know, if you go out that way too, there's a point where the Big Darby crosses 161,
Mhm.
and there's a very interesting sign and marker there that says that that is the starting point of a trail where Tecumseh himself cut a trail from the Big Darby to the Scioto River. And it is basically from that point, and 161 became that trail.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And I just find that
And
fascinating.
that's east of Plain City. You actually
Yeah,
can't take that right now, and you can't take 161 out.
right.
They've had
They're doing construction.
construction, and there's a huge housing complex going in now. And they actually put a new traffic circle in since within the last 2 weeks since I was there
Yeah.
last. So it'll divert you around, but it's still very easy.
I heard they have to redo that traffic circle.
Redo it again that they just put in.
Yes,
Yeah, they
not,
were working on it today.
not big enough for tractor trailers to go around.
Oh, it's not. It is very small. Oh my gosh, that is so
Yes,
true.
they got tractor trailers trying to negotiate and they're way up on top of the curbs and
Oh my goodness, it is tight and it's a very small one. That will be right. Oh my gosh. But that Bigelow Prairie though, if you want to take a day trip, it's 5 feet high vegetation. I've never seen the royal catchfly out like it is right now. They're blooming and it's stunning. The purple cone flowers, the
yeah,
gray cone flowers, and there are very different shades of cone flowers, and absolutely the fleabanes are starting, and it's just in full spectacular bloom, 5 feet high. But the hummingbirds are spectacular. They are the insects,
uh,
uh,
you know what
dragonflies
happened?
and damselflies.
You know what happened to me? Because you just reminded me of it. I got seeds for purple cone flowers, and I planted them in my in the spring. I planted them in my um, herb garden,
Mhm.
and they're really tall now. I mean, they're like 5 feet tall.
Yeah,
And
that's what mine
I
are.
was
Yeah.
looking at the flowers, and I said, "Those are something else. Those do not look like purple cone flower."
Hmm.
And I snapped a picture of one of them with iNaturalist,
Mhm.
and it's wild bergamot.
Oh yeah, I have tons of that too, which also is a wonder. And that's blooming in huge numbers in the prairie right
Yeah,
now.
I mean, it's still really neat looking, and I'm glad I got it, but it's not what I had wanted
Yeah,
initially.
which is yeah, um, and it's just gorgeous though right now,
Yeah,
and it's a great native plant. So yeah. But anyway, it's a well worth a trip, and it won't take long, and
and it's on
absolutely beautiful.
161.
Yeah, it's if you map it, Google map it, it's a left-hand turn. I'm just trying to remember the name of the road right now. I can't think of it, but you can see it from 161, and it's just outside of, west of Plain City, and it's called Bigelow. You can do Bigelow Cemetery or Bigelow State Nature Preserve because the state took it over, and it's a pioneer cemetery, half acre, and it's never been tilled. The original family owned it for many generations, and it was never disturbed other than planting the people there. And it has some restored
Yeah,
stones. Very
I,
historic cemetery, early founders of the area from Plain City. And I had talked about it in my prairies, but it's one of the very few of the original prairies left in Ohio. And
yeah,
cemeteries with places for it.
I see it here. It's like 27 minutes from my house.
Yeah. What's the name of the road? Rosedale. That's it. I just remember it.
Rosedale. Yes, Rosedale.
Yeah, it's Rosedale, and it's just on the right-hand side. You just park right in front of it, and you won't see any traffic on the road. And I took so many pictures there of the insects with my macro lens day. So I will be doing some pretty interesting macro photographs I've taken of some cool looking insects. So really nice. Highly recommend. Caesar's Creek was a lot of fun too, and another place called Spring Valley and Spring Valley Lake, Spring Valley Nature Preserve, Spring Valley Lake. We were there also. Absolutely stunning places. So anyway.
I was at Duranso this past Friday,
Mhm.
and I got another bucket full of really cool stuff.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know what I got to do something. My collection's getting to the point where I really don't have room to display at all.
Yep. Understand. Yep. All right.
All right. Thank you
Have a
very much
great
for
week.
joining us, Carolyn.
No problem.
Yep,
Thank you for
Elizabeth will
the,
be back next week and whoever else. Yep.
okay.
Great presentation.
Great
Thank
job.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm in the dark here again.
Hold on, I gotta stop recording.